When kids struggle with reading or spelling, it almost always comes down to the same basic problem. The human brain has evolved over a few 100,000 years to meet the needs of humans. The brain has many distinct areas, and for all of us, balance happens back here, judgment up here, vision back here somewhere, muscle control up here, and language over here on the left-hand side of the brain. This area for that function, this area for another. But there is no part of the brain dedicated to reading. This is because reading and writing are recent inventions within the last few thousand years. The brain simply has not evolved to accommodate it. But fortunately, the human brain is a plastic thing. It can grow and adapt and build new pathways to accommodate new skills. This means that some part or parts of our brain that evolved for another purpose must adapt and grow to accommodate reading. But which? Writing was invented differently by different peoples, so which bit of the brain is best to adapt for reading depends on the writing system used. Many writing systems began as pictograms. A shape like this might represent a hill, perhaps this one representing a person. They became more stylized and sophisticated over time, but they are still based on shape rather than sound. For these writing systems, making sense of text is a visual process, so the visual area of the brain is the best bit to develop for reading. Chinese characters have meaning embedded. These all relate to water some way, and you can see these bits that are common in all of them. Ocean, lake, river, drink, sea, flood, swim, and many other words related to water will all have this bit in the character. It is a symbol for meaning. But English does not work like this. English is an alphabetic language. In other words, it began as an attempt to write down what words sound like rather than what objects look like or mean. I, w, in, t, o, v, a, shop. T, each, sp, each. All the sounds are there. It is really complicated, and some words like cough and come have strayed rather a lot from their original pronunciation. But there is no doubt that kids who go on to read easily and spell instinctively are kids who primarily adapt the various bits of the brain that are related to speech and language. Over here, on the left-hand side of the brain, brain imaging studies leave us with absolutely no doubt that competent readers and writers of English store written words in this part of the brain, tagging them on to what they already know about the word, what the word means, and how it is pronounced. But there is nothing automatic about this. Kids who naturally think in speech sounds are most likely to go on to adapt this part of the brain. But kids who struggle a little with identifying individual sounds and words, and especially kids who are also very visual, will instinctively try to use this part of the brain, trying to remember the shape and look of each word as if it was a picture. That would be fine for some writing systems, but it is not how English works. These kids are always going to find reading hard going, they are unlikely to enjoy it, and spelling will be a nightmare. So when brain scans are taken of competent and struggling children, two very different pictures emerge. This child, who has processed the speech sounds and patterns embedded in spoken words in the act of reading, has no difficulty with reading and spelling. This one, who has instinctively looked for visual patterns, but that is not how the language works. No wonder making sense of it all is challenging. Some kids go down this path of reading failure because their visual skills are very strong. Some because they cannot detect the individual speech sounds and spoken words. Others tip this way because they have a particular difficulty with processing sound, especially the dyslexic kids, and others have a more general processing problem. Whatever the reason, the solution is essentially the same. The child needs to learn to think with this part of the brain, relating the letters on the page to the sounds of speech. Some kids also need to learn strategies to overcome their processing difficulties. The look and guess strategy that struggling children rely on must be pushed into the background, a backup strategy employed only when all else fails. These kids need to learn to think differently, to think as good readers think, to think in a way that reflects how English words work. The next video in this series, What Reading Failure Looks Like, demonstrates where reading and writing have gone wrong for 3 representative children.